The world around us is hostile to the Word of God and to biblical values, but we are called to be salt and light, to stand for truth in a decaying culture. We are not called to run from the fire, but be willing to step into the fire. God has placed you at this time in history on purpose and for a purpose. Join us as we get better equipped to address civics and culture from a biblical worldview. Welcome to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church. Let's welcome our hosts Allison Furno and Debi Vandenboom.
Today's topic is reframing singleness in the church. So we have with us Susan Reynolds, who's on staff here at Dream City Church in the administration office, right, working with Kingdom Builders there. We're so happy to have you here. And then Sam Oriza, who is our guest host. We're really close to having you be our permanent official.
I'm almost there.
We're just almost over the finish line with that whole thing.
Then you won't have to remember.
Oh no! I won't have to remember to say it every time because the more things I have to remember is we just start getting into territory there where it gets scary. Things that I have like setting my timer, all kinds of stuff that I have to remember. But we're so happy to have you join us today. So what we're talking about today has nothing to do with your role here at the church, but a conversation that you and I had during 21 Days of Prayer, and that we thought would be a great episode for this, and it's something that's not talked about a whole lot. So I'm going to let Sam go ahead and take it away with some questions, but we're so glad you're here with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, I'm really excited for this episode. So why don't we start with a little bit about who you are and where you're from and kind of what sparked this journey of researching single ministry in the church?
Great question.
Yeah.
So I'm from California. Sacramento, California is where I'm from. So I'm a transplant. Got here about a decade ago, but I've been a lifelong church member. I'm pretty loyal. I don't hop around too much. So when I find a good church family home, I try to stay there. But something that I noticed, back then I was 26, 27 when I moved here. And since I've moved here 27 to now 37, I just have been so busy with my relationship with Jesus. I've had my head down. I've been working hard. I've been volunteering. And about a year and a half ago, I kind of woke up from my singleness haze. I feel like it was a fog. I was busy doing other things, didn't think about it, wasn't on the radar. In October 2023, I was like, okay, I'm not active in this. I'm not trying to change this. Like, what's going on with singleness? Who are my peers? Are we feeling the same things? So I kind of just went on a rampage of talking to people. So I ended up stumbling across a group called Thrive Phoenix Christian Singles. It was outside the church. It's just a Facebook group. And I ended up finding a few other communities out there that were meeting a need that wasn't getting met in the church, at least at the local level, that they knew about. And so after just talking with all these people, how do we all have a universal experience of not having a built-in community that is readily available and seen?
Right.
So I kind of
any church,
right? Because I was
like,
how many churches were probably represented in that group?
So it's about 5,000 people in this group locally here in the Phoenix area.
Okay.
There's probably 240 churches represented. And only one of them that I know has a solid, thriving singles group that's 45 plus.
Wow. Okay, so older.
Older. So there is a massive gap from you go to kids' church, you go to youth, you go to young adults. Maybe there's a careers something in there. But right around the age of 30, 25 to 30, you feel aged out of those groups because every fall the new 18-year-olds come in. And so when you hit that cusp, if you're not married, where does the baton get handed to? Where do you go for your community?
Right.
And totally unconsciously, this is not an on-purpose thing at all. I think it's just an honest blind spot, is if there's no baton to go to, where do you go? Where's your answer, right?
Yeah.
So if they have nowhere to go and nobody feeding into them, why would they stay in the church?
Right.
I think that's one of your questions, right? Or what are some reasons why people...
We'll get into that.
Okay.
Right, yeah, definitely. No, I know, because I was like, so this group you said was about 5,000. Are there other church or other groups like that in Phoenix? Like how many when you were searching for them? Or did they just like fall into your lap? Did you find them? Kind of like...
Yeah, I went hunting. I was on a research season, haha. And no, so there's groups from only 30 people up to 500, 600 people. There's offshoots that will come from these groups. So it will start really wide, from never marrieds with kids, divorced with kids, widowers with kids, without kids, you know, the whole gambit. And then they'll have smaller offshoots, more age or stage related. So almost like a small group in a church, right? You start wide, you find your community, you do more small group oriented activities with the smaller relationships. But gosh, when you get into a corporate gathering of a lot of people on the same stage as you, it's quite powerful, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And they have regular sort of things that people get together to do?
Yes. So we do a lot of fun events. Honestly, most of it is good, clean fun.
Because these are Christian groups,
These are
right?
Christian groups. So we go out to things like dualies, where you watch a show of dueling pianos and singing. We go to movies. I'm going to the trip with the Philippines with my singles group. They go to sporting events, you know, spring training, restaurants, birthdays, Topgolf. We had like 90 people come to Topgolf just to come hang out. We rented the whole top of the thing.
Yeah.
So, but in addition to that, we definitely have, you know, smaller offshoots of Bible studies and worship nights and different things. It's just not headed up by a church sponsoring an event. So we found a need, and we kind of filled it ourselves.
Yeah, you kind of had to go outside. Yeah. And back to kind of talking about when the baton being passed, right? Those people often, I was researching this, and you sent me a graphic about this, I found it really interesting that most unmarried single women, like the statistic is like 72% of them lean Democrat, I think, or to the left, lean to the left. So I was like, oh, wow, this is we can capitalize this, like on this in the church, I feel like.
Huge.
There's an opportunity, right? So
wide open. And you think about the actual demographic of singles in general, like not just women, but it's right around the 50 to 51% of American adults over the age of 18 are single right now, right? And that's all the different demographics. So it's wide open. And then think about,
which I don't think it's ever been that way, right? I mean, that's a new thing. So I think to a certain degree, it's like this is uncharted territory a little bit.
It's a snowball, and it's coming. Right. It's already rolling down the hill, and it's growing at an uncontrollable rate, and we have to do something.
Right.
Well, and think about, what are the messages the world is telling men and women about identity for themselves? What is the world telling them about marriage? And what is the world telling them about families? Are they making it so marriage and families are attractive right now? What do you guys think? What's the world telling it? So I think some of that culture is definitely seeping into our young adults, because I have lots of people I'm trying to mentor and coach and pour into who don't think marriage is attractive and in fact is dangerous.
Interesting.
So then they're totally happy staying isolated and alone, and they don't want to connect or plug in, right? And same with families. It's undervalued. Kids are a burden. That's a lot of work. I want to be free. I want to go do what I want to do. I want to be unattached. That's what we're told, is being strong, independent women.
Right.
Men are getting the same message flipped of marriage is dangerous. All the laws favor women. So you're going to lose your money. You're going to lose your kids. You know, the women can lie and you can be defamed. You'll lose your job. So if you have this huge chasm of men versus women and they can't even talk to each other, of course everybody's going to remain single.
Of course there's going to be an issue.
Right. Yeah, and I think, I don't know if this wasn't part of your thing, but you talked about at one point COVID, that era being a big thing of everybody kind of went in, right? It's like you were all isolated, and it bred this idea of just being alone and being on your computer and not being out in the world socializing with other people, which then I think lends itself to that as well. Yeah. And I think that what you're talking about with the culture being very driven by education, by your career, by all of those things as those being your identity, right? Which they're all important, right? Those things are absolutely important, but and then the church tends to have that, your marriage and your family are your identity, but your identity is from Christ, not from any of those things, right? Those are all pieces of who you are, and they're all important, but your ultimate identity comes from the Lord, not from those things, right? Yeah.
Well, it's almost like the label of single gets slapped on at church. Honestly, I mean, it's a little painful to hear, but nobody in the world cares that I'm single.
Right.
They come talk to me the same. They come interact with me. They're warm. They're engaging. I get invited to things constantly. There's no awkwardness. There's no tiptoeing around the issue.
Seen as like the culture, right? Like I feel like it's not accepted, but like seen as maybe more of a norm amongst them. Maybe.
Well, they just don't put a label of you're married, so I believe this about you, or you're single, I believe this about you. So I don't know what the solution is other than to remove labels and say, gosh, you're just a follower of Christ. I'm a follower of Christ too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Haven't we been trying to do that in society for so long? Removing labels.
One more to add to
I know. Let's add this to the list too.
There's a whole list of them. Yep.
Yeah. Can you tell us some of the main reasons why single ministries within the church will either maybe fall through, or why most singles will end up leaving the church between the ages of probably 25 to 36 maybe? Yeah.
That's usually the demographic. And again, it's right at that cusp where there's just no next step to hand to. So if there's nothing there, it's hard to remain without community for a long period of time. The other thing is I've talked to so many of the singles community, and even people who never want to get married. Let's say that they've lost the love of their life and they're going to remain single until the day that they die. They're so happy for the marriage and family education and things that we do put on the church. They love that. They champion that education. But when you don't have the opposite, or how to do singleness well, there's no education on how to do that pathway. And I think that 25 to 36-year-old gap is when they start to really notice it. In addition to that, you think about the 25-year-olds that do get married, the half that do get married and start families. Well, families want to have friends with other families. And they invite their families' friends to lunches, to their house, for celebrations, for baby showers, for, even just day to day, go to the movies. Who are you going to call up? Your kids' friends who play dates, right? That's what happens. So there's this natural falling away of your community if you're not coupled up by 25 through 36. There's another idea that if you're not married by a certain age, you're somehow less mature or less trustworthy. So sometimes, like if you think about it in your head and you see a 35-year-old man and a 25-year-old man, and the 35-year-old is single and the 25-year-old is married, for whatever reason, we put more maturity and trustworthiness sometimes on that 25-year-old married person. And so if that happens, you as a single person will go, gosh, am I immature? Do I need to go, work on myself? I feel stunted almost, or like I'm not where I should be. And so that's really hard to stay in a church and in a community if you're not being able to fix it, right? If there's something lacking. So I think there's also something where we are seen as having more time. Oh, you don't have a family and you don't have kids, so you can volunteer every minute of the day. You can be involved in 16 ministries. You can show up and babysit for me. So then you get burnt out and you're seen as your only value is to show up and serve other people, which can be beautiful. But I think that also contributes to people leaving between 25 and 30.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And then also why the singles ministry sometimes, like we don't see them, like you said, you only know of like one church in the valley. I don't know if it's in the valley, but that has like a sustainable singles ministry. So what have you found in like your research and talking to people has been like the main reasons why the church doesn't have them?
Absolutely. So what I've noticed, at least here in the Valley in the last 30 years, is a singles group will become, really popular. It'll skyrocket. It'll become so strong and well attended and well loved. And then every single one dies for one of 3 reasons within 4 to 7 years, and they never come back. So the 3 reasons are you might have an innovative, visionary leader who has the mission and, preaches the mission and has a heart for it. And then they don't raise up a succession line or have buy-in from leadership. And so if for whatever reason that leader leaves, they get married or they get another position or whatever it is, if that leader leaves, the whole group crumbles.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Second reason is sometimes it'll grow and grow and grow, and it becomes a problem for the church hosting it. And sometimes it becomes a church within the church.
I mean, you did say there was 5,000 people in that one group, so that for singles looking for that doesn't sometimes.
So if it becomes too big, sometimes churches have to shut it down and move it only to small groups. So that's kind of
which we don't need to name the church, but you were telling me about a story about a specific church that happened where that became threatening. It wasn't our church; it was somebody else, but where that became like a threatening
thing, and it heartbroken because they were like, I had my community, I had my people, and now I can only meet in a home with 10 people. That was a little hurtful.
Yeah.
And then the third reason why these groups have been toppling over and never coming back is if there's a whiff of predatory or inappropriate behavior, they shut the entire group down. Nobody digs in and fixes it or retrains or comes alongside. And I don't notice that happening in youth groups. I don't notice that happening in young adults as much. You usually fix it. And for some reason in that singles pool, it's too scary or too hard to deal with. And so we'd rather just shut the group down.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I kind of think as I'm listening to you talk too, I'm kind of thinking too that in some cases it may be that, okay, likely an ideal leader for a singles group like that is someone who's single. So then if that person doesn't stay single, then there's some overturn and things coming and going and,
What we've found is usually actually somebody who had an extended season as a single person and got married later is the best leader. Because they've been seeing both pieces. And you usually want to meet a mentor and a leader of somebody who's going where you want to go.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not always, sometimes like you said, it is a single person leading it and they're fabulous.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to get on board. The trick is, I want to suggest, don't throw somebody 22 just at a Bible school and trying to lead a 65-year-old divorced people. Right. There's not a lot.
Well, that's true for all kinds of ministry, but yeah.
So what, I know we're talking a lot about how the ministry may be lacking in your church. And so what resources or maybe advice, actually, I'm going to ask first, what advice would you have for people who maybe will be struggling with singleness or struggling finding community in their church during this season?
Well, let's talk, before we get into that, let's just talk just in general about, I think that there's, along with this, is just this epidemic of loneliness that's been going on. I think that kind of will lead into that other one. I'm just thinking out as we're talking, but that, because it's not about being single or not being single or, it's not even necessarily about that specifically. I mean, that is the topic of what we're talking about, but I think the core of it is, again, your identity and community, right? So it's like you've got those two pillars that if you have, whether there is a thriving singles ministry in a church or in your town, right? If you live in a small town or whatever, if you have a sense of purpose and identity in yourself with the Lord, and you have a community of people that are your friends and your, like you're talking about these people that you go do things with and go, going to out of the country and having fun with, right? Like we all need that. And we all go through seasons of life where, there's a lot of young moms that when they first have a baby, they feel really isolated and alone because they're not out doing anything with anybody over the age of 2,
Absolutely, yeah.
And so it's those seasons of loneliness and feeling isolated that really is where that mental that it starts to get difficult, right?
Yeah, that battle lies.
That battle is getting difficult there. And so I don't know if anybody wanted to say anything specifically about that. You had talked a little bit, I think, about this like sense of loneliness on these groups of people that back when I very first talked to you about that, about how many people are just wanting community out there. I'm kind of springing this question on you because it wasn't on our list, but I was thinking about this as we're talking, that's ultimately what we're talking about, is that not having a sense of community,
or
right?
even not,
because you don't
not your sense of identity, like knowing who your identity lies with,
right?
Like,
yeah. Right.
That makes sense.
because a family is like a natural just identity, right? I mean, you have a natural community, the people that and again, those seasons like are different when you have empty nesters or little kids, like those, even within a family, when you are married and have kids, you can have those seasons where you feel really isolated and without community. But it is sort of a natural physical community that you're part of, and if you don't have that, right, if you're an adult and you're living on your own, right, not with family members, or then you don't have that natural community. So it is even more important to have community, I think. I mean, this is me saying I'm the married person in the room, right? but I mean, it just seems like that makes sense, right? That you have to have, it's that sense of community and purpose that is really, in essence, what we're talking about having. Is that make sense? Yeah. What I'm saying?
Yeah, and the identity isn't in the marriage, right?
Yeah.
Can you have an identity? Can you have a fully
abundant
life in Christ as a family and as a single person?
Right.
I think you can.
Yeah.
I don't think I have to wait.
Right.
That's why I don't like the term waiting season. What are you waiting on?
Right.
Life is right here in front of you. You know, there's souls out there to be won. There's people to love on. There's so much work to do. And if we just sit down on our hands and make it all inward, I think that's a lot of the problem. And think about the secular world and what they tell people about mental health, right? It's all my truth and what's important. I need to do what's best for me my feelings. And we make it so inward. And that's not good for us, right?
Right.
It's sickness to just keep looking inward for the answer. And so obviously, yes, their identity in Christ or online. Exactly.
That's a big contributor to loneliness too.
It is. But I think, like you were saying, a marriage and a family is a built-in community, right?
Right.
A single person, how do you force a community as a person by themselves?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can, right?
Right.
So then what we're asking is for supernatural empathy from our married friends and sisters and family members and people in our networks. Like just sit for a moment and think about being alone. You drive to work alone. You eat alone. You go home alone. You go to church. You sit by yourself. You don't have somebody to sit with, a built-in person. Maybe you're visiting a church for the first time. What's that experience like? Okay, now you're sitting and listening to the message. What are you hearing from the stage? Okay, now you come up and you ask, what is there for somebody who looks like me? So that's where I'm praying for a supernatural empathy to just spread through churches and congregations to go, I'm not cultivating relationships with single people. Gosh, look at all these opportunities to really...
Huge field of harvest.
Huge field of harvest. That's beautiful. And, I think people would snap. That would be world-changing to us.
Right.
To somebody invite us over for Thanksgiving.
Well, it's a huge number of people, too.
Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you put that hat on of just sit for the next week, put that hat on of I'm just sitting here and I'm in my own world, but what would a single person be feeling right now? Men and women. It's not a gendered thing.
Right.
It's true.
Well, and when we got totally off of our questions, but it's okay.
It all goes
it's
together.
Good. It does all go together. But and two, you're talking about biblically. Okay, Jesus was single; he was never married. Paul was never married, right? I mean, you do have a lot of biblical references where it's like the ministry that they did had nothing to do with whether or not they were married. And so I do think we need to, separate that. A little bit in thinking about about people in general. Yeah.
Well, and I totally see how we got here too. You know, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, the singles population was super small and it was a unique group. It just was. It's just factual. And now it's no longer the minority. And so how do we invite them to the table?
Yeah.
And where you're seeing a lot of, I mean, I don't know that this is, but again, too, with a lot of the, like the crazy people you see yelling at someone online, right? It's like, we've seen a lot of those videos.
The internet.
Right. The quote, like, yeah, right. But also, or the, the mental health issues and whatever. So there's a lot of factors that really could be, that play into this, right? That if we could just deal with people, right, and help people and realize that there are a ton of people out there who are lonely, and think of it in that aspect, as opposed to, because I think, again, I think you're right in that there's a stigma of singleness, right? That it's like, okay, well, you were saying the things that people say about if you're single,
gosh, if
right?
you're just content in Jesus, he'll bring your spouse.
Right.
But you need to be content right now. Oh yeah. All of the do you have any sin in your life that could be holding you back from this blessing? There's so many things that have been shared as well-meaning, well-intentioned thing, but just think about what you're telling people.
Right.
After so long of hearing that.
I think this is a lesson that we need to learn in general about lots of things that people need to think before.
That's true.
I have this conversation talking about like when someone's lost a baby or when they've had whatever. It's like, can you think about what you're saying? You're trying to be helpful. Like people have compassion and they're trying to be helpful, but they don't really think about how things sound.
Right.
Yeah. And is that true sometimes? Yes. It may be true sometimes. Like you have people who, you see someone, you're like, okay, I understand why. You know what I mean?
Right.
Makes sense. It is a little crazy, but I think that's a rarity. That's not the most, when you're talking about so many people that are single, it's a huge number right now. So that's not the case. It's a whole different dynamic that we're dealing with. I mean, that may have been the case 50 years ago where you have someone who, that what they called spinsters or, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like the terms that they used a long time ago, but that's not what we're dealing with now. It's a whole different dynamic of people. Yeah. But I think we tend to view things from an old lens of the way that it used to be and not looking at, okay, this is, again, you said almost half the population of adults is single. That's a staggering number of people.
It's growing.
It is, right?
That's what I'm saying. We gotta do something now.
And if we're not intentionally trying to minister and reach out to people in that category, that's a big chunk of the population that we're overlooking.
Well, and back to your COVID comment, that was between, I was 20 to like 24 really. And that's really the age where you're out meeting people, right?
Yes.
And that's when they told everybody that you couldn't do that. So we lost so much of that, I think, too. So, yeah.
What are you starting to see now that you're a little bit past 24? Like what?
I think also a lot of us, I think now are kind of coming to the realization that my 20s are looking kind of different than what I thought they would. Cause I also grew up in the church. So kind of like, oh yeah, you do get married young, like have kids, like all these things, right? Like, and it's great. Don't get me wrong. I love it.
We love it.
Yes, I love it.
Go you.
But I did kind of like almost expect that in my 20s. And so now being in my mid 20s, not living that life is kind of like okay, wait, brain now, like almost reorienting the way that I'm thinking about singleness. Back to the title, Reframing, the way we think about singleness. But it's true because for so long, even I thought that like about myself, like, oh, this was what I was supposed to do because my identity was in the fact that I was going to be married and eventually be a mom, and that's what I was supposed to do.
Your life starts.
Right, exactly. That's when your life starts. That's a lot of, like, you hear that a lot too. So it's like, oh, well, I feel like I'm almost missing out on that. But on the not maybe the upside, but on the other side of it is that I've found so many women who are also like me and going through the same thing. So it's honestly really encouraging, like being able to talk through things, be like, oh, yep, I'm struggling with this too. And just having like that community. So I think that that's great. But also even now, just like meeting you and talking to you about this, I mean, like, oh my gosh, she has gone through this before me. And I think now talking about it on the podcast too, just reaching out to more people, men and women who are single, who may be also going through the same like brain realizations as me, but that it's okay.
Yeah, well, and keep doing it. I want to encourage you because my generation didn't say anything. Yeah, we didn't want to be the squeaky wheel or be the complainers or the whiners, or we didn't say anything. And that's why back in October I started this for me. And now it's so much bigger because I'm meeting amazing people, men and women from all different walks. I'm like, I'm ready to put my sword on and my shield on and go to battle.
Yeah. Guys, let's raise our voice.
We have an army sitting there. Yeah, so it's so much bigger than us.
Yes, true. So good. Yeah. Yeah. So
any resources for people looking to get plugged into a singleness group, or any advice for people going through their season of singleness, or maybe loneliness too?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, start something. You see a hole, fill it. Start something. That's why I'm here, right? Yeah. So I think that's the first thing, is to not wait around for somebody to serve you. Start right now dreaming. Ask God for visions and dreams of what this could look like. Talk to your leaders. Not enough of us are talking to the leaders and asking questions and asking for help. So I think that's a huge start. Here in the Valley, there are a couple of Facebook groups out there, Thrive Phoenix Christian Singles, and then another group's called Christian Singles Fun and Events. And again, those are just communities of events and opportunities to mingle. Yeah. Yes. There's also Church of the Highlands just did a series on the Song of Solomon. And it is about dating, it's about purity, it's about attraction, it's about all different kinds of stuff around that. So I think that's a great resource. There's also a podcast called The Heart of Dating Project. Again, these are for people who are looking for relationships. If you're happy in your singleness season, then I would recommend a single local group for sure. But other than all those, volunteer. I mean, I know I just talked about fatigue volunteering, but you truly form those relationships and you find fulfillment when you're shoulder to shoulder in the trenches with somebody. So Cornerstone has a great group. Again, if you're 45 plus, 50 plus, wonderful group down there.
Awesome. Great resources.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, I think that's great, and just too, I think that with just in general, because I was thinking about this, like you're talking, some of the things you're talking about, I really can relate to like other seasons of not just being single, but being isolated at home with a young baby or whatever. Like there's all different seasons. And I was talking to people who are in the same season that I am, where your kids are growing up and moving out of the house, and it's a whole shift in like your identity and what your role is and the job, all of that. But whatever season you are in, since we have our season guest, right? That God is there, right? That He wants us to talk to Him about those things. That it's okay to say, "Hey, I'm struggling right now. I need friends. I need a relationship. I'm looking for this," and to have those conversations with the Lord, because He's big enough to
handle it.
To handle that, right? To handle those conversations. And to be honest and to find one or two people that you can really talk to about day-to-day life and those struggles and things. If you even have one person that you can kind of have a conversation with and seek those out, again, be the person to step up. And if you're feeling that way in whatever season of life you are, be the initiator, like what you were talking about, even within a group, like invite someone else to come do something with you, right? To make those steps to have that relationship and start, because they may be thinking the same thing too, right?
Well, and I love what you said about bringing everything to God, right?
Yeah.
Bring everything to, He can take it. Do you know how many times I've screamed at Him in my car? I have been so angry, and He's listened and held me through it all. Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting here going, okay, everybody has this phrase called, "Oh, I'm just in my season of singleness," or, I'm just in my single season. If I die as single season, do you know how much I'm going to be talking to Jesus about this?
Lord.
So just, right?
Yeah.
Listen.
I know.
That's literally my name. Not okay.
Yeah, like not funny.
Not funny. But like I said, he's held me through it all.
Right.
He's given me such an ocean of love and support that I haven't had to go out and settle and feel less than or, anything else. So I just want to encourage the other people out there. You have an ultimate, unending resource right there. Keep going to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church.
You can listen to this podcast on Apple and Spotify and follow us on social media. Find all the info on the show notes. To learn more about Dream City Church, visit our website at dreamcitychurch.us. Thanks for listening.